We are still in Chapter 3. We're still in Section 2. I'm on page 142, and I'm looking at what's called shortcuts or computational formulas for s squared and s. Shortcut formulas for computing the variance and the standard deviation are presented next and will be used in the remainder of the chapter and in the exercises. These formulas are mathematically equivalent to the preceding formulas and do not involve using the mean. They save time when repeated subtracting and squaring occur in the original formulas. They are also more accurate when the mean has been rounded. You see the shortcut formulas, and you've already seen some other formulas in the other videos you've been watching. And I want to point out that you have a formula card. You're not going to be using the formula card on the first test, but the formulas that you need will be supplied on the first test. So what you're doing is building your formula card so that when you do get to use it on a test, you're familiar with it. You know where the items are on the card, and you know what they mean, how to find them, how to manipulate them, input variables, and then come up with your reasonable answer or answers. And so I'm right here at Chapter 3, and you see some information that you've already been looking at, but then right here there's a shortcut formula. That's the one we're going to be talking about in this video. You see that there is an S. You've already talked about it. You've been talking about variance and then standard deviation. And pieces and parts, I would just highly encourage you to not freak out, but to always look at this at a granular level. Like this is the square root of an n. That's going to be our number of items. We're going to sum up the x squares. But then this one's different. We're going to sum up the x's, and then we're going to square. We'll divide it by our number times this part's going to be different. Well, and you've actually seen it before. So I'm not going to get into the other parts you've already seen. I need to stay right here, and that we are talking about a shortcut formula. Do make some kind of note on your formula card, or just leave it alone or highlight it. Whatever's going to help you to remember. You might even take a highlighter and highlight the words shortcut formula. But here we are. Here's the formula. One is for variance and one is for standard deviation. I know that you've already been looking at videos and that you've already looked at, thought through a whole lot on variance being the squared and then the square root of that being the standard deviation. And you'll notice over here that they only give us the standard deviation formula, but no problem once I find that. Well, anyway, you know how it relates to the square root. Again, will leave that alone. I do want to look here at example 3-21. On 3-21, it is talking about teacher strikes and the number of public school teacher strikes in Pennsylvania, and it lists them here. So I've already worked through this problem, but I highly encourage you to start from scratch, like just some scratch piece of paper or in your notes. And it says find the sample variance and the sample standard deviation. So they were kind to give us the sample, and so we are going to use the S, and we will talk more about how we can kind of flip-flop between the two. Sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. We're just going to go with this one that they gave us sample. We're going to celebrate because that's what we have. We're going to look for the variance, then hit the square root of it, and then it's going to be the sample standard deviation. Whenever I'm working with anything or any of these formulas that we're working with, I like to try to get myself organized and have as few mistakes as possible. Can't quite eliminate all of them, but I can have as few as possible. So I like to do charts for myself. And so looking at our formula, we're going to have to take all of our x squares and sum them. We're also going to have to take all of the x's, the sum of all of the x's, and square that. So I'm going to go with simple, and I'm going to start my column with all of my x values. Like here are all of my numbers. And so I have my 9, 10, 14, 7, 8, and 3 listed. Now since my formula wants to know the sum of all of those x values, I did. I added them up and I got 51. And in just a minute I'm going to put that in my formula, that the sum of the x values is 51, and it's going to go right there, and then I'll end up squaring that number, 51 times 51. I like to go ahead and write down the x values because then when I need to square them, because this other part needs them squared and then add them all up, and so I like to go ahead and square them. What I wrote right there. Oh, I put 12 squared. That's funny. It's really 196. Squared, 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 squared. And then I'm going to add them up because I need the sum of all of the squares of the x's. When I do that, I'm getting 499. So in my formula, I like to write all of the formula out. So down here at the bottom, I like to write the formula out. I don't have that written out on here. And when I write it out, I like to go through there very carefully and plug in the pieces and parts. And so I could have my formula card beside me, because remember I am practicing. I don't have to have this memorized. But I'm going to start with that and it has that up here and doesn't even have it here. So pick the way you want to go. I will be good and follow what they're doing. They're doing the s squared first. So let's see if I can get all of this on the same screen. And so starting with the s squared, I need to go grab the n. The n are the number of items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's what we put in the formula. The 499, well, the 499 I got over here because it's my squared amount summed up. So the squared amount summed was 499 minus, I need to go grab my sum of my x values, which is over here. That's my 51. And then it says I'm supposed to square that, so I'm supposed to square it. Divided by, as the formula says, my number times my number minus 1. So my number times my number minus 1 is going to be 5. So the biggest thing, if I were you right now, is I would grab my calculator, I would take this, and I would start punching. You've got to be smarter than your calculator, and you've got to be able to punch this where they are saying that we get about 13.1. I'll go ahead and punch this in, just to give you an example. Sometimes the punching is what messes people up. So I'll go ahead and punch this in, and I'm going to treat my calculator as if it's dumb, because it is pretty dumb. So I'm going to hit clear several times. That's always a good practice. I'm going to do 6 times 499, and I'm going to hit equals, just because I want to make sure my calculator hears me, that needs to happen first. Minus. Well, depending on my calculator, I need to know my calculator. I think I can punch in 51 and then tell it to square it. And it won't square the whole thing. It will literally just square my 51. And I'm going to hit equals because my calculator is dumb. Now I need to do divide by. Well, anytime I don't have to use parentheses, I like that. So I'm going to do 6 times 5, and 6 times 5 is 30. So I'm just going to tell it we're dividing by 30. And I get 13.1. The world is a good place. That's what they said we were supposed to get about-ish. And we don't even have to round. It is what it is. They asked for the variance in our question. Yay, we have the variance. That is the s squared. Now to find the standard deviation, we have to take this number, this 13.1, and take its square root. And so depending on how your calculator works, I think this one works that, let me find the square root. I have to do second squared, and that gets me a square root. And then I wanted to use our last answer. So the ANS is hiding right there. So I'm going to do second ANS, and that tells me I want to take a square root of the answer I just had. Let me focus this. I like closing the parentheses, but I don't think I have to, and that didn't help much. And then I'm going to hit equals, and it says it's about 3.619, depending on what we're supposed to round to. They rounded to the 10th and got 3.6, which that makes sense. The 1 is behind the 6, though the 1 will not impact the 6. And we are done, and then we just need to state what we have and clarify that the sample variance was the s squared, and the sample standard deviation is the 3.6. So this concludes our video on the shortcut for variance and standard deviation.